Hi, everybody. This is Donnie Winchell from Ohio Wine Producers. And this is the first of a series of videos that our office is producing to try and help folks who want to get into the wine business get started on the right foot. It's an amazing industry, it's an amazing business, but it's not as easy as some folks perceive it to be. So, this is designed to preview the kinds of things you might want to think about prior to getting too far down the road into getting your winery organized. And even if you've already started, some things to think about that you might apply to the progress that you're making. First of all, I share with everybody all the time, the wine business is not for the faint of heart. It is an occupation that has all kinds of rewards, but it is much more than just a fun weekend with friends. If you've been going to wineries and sitting on these patios in the summer and sipping a lovely glass of white wine and enjoying the music and the birds and the aromas from the grapes, that's part of what your business will be, but it's much more than that and much more complicated than that. It is not especially glamorous most of the time. It really is not. There's a lot of tug and grunt. There's a lot of hectic evenings. There's a lot of detail that needs to be part of what your plan will be. It for sure is not a 9 to 5 job. If you anticipate opening this winery and just working 40 hours a week, 3 or 4 days a week, and then taking every weekend off with the kids to go to soccer matches, it's not going to work. You really do need to make a commitment, and the successful wineries have owner presence on a regular basis. You can hire some wonderful managers, but the owners have to be around too. It's not easy. It's hard. Moving those barrels is a chore. Getting the grapes coming in from a grower at 10 o'clock at night when you anticipated them coming in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon is part of what you're going to have to plan for. It's also not a short-term commitment. It's going to take a couple of years in planning. It's going to take a couple of years if you're growing grapes to get those grapes going. It's going to take a couple more years for you to hone your craft and a couple more years for you to get that wine onto the market and begin selling enough to begin paying your bills. So you need to think about a 3 to 5 or 10-year plan as you move forward to get this project going. It's also not the road to riches necessarily. We have some extremely successful wineries. Wineries have started with very little, managed their money carefully, worked very hard, were frugal in how they spent on what was needed, not what they were more about needs than wants, and they have done very, very well. But we've also had some wineries who have gotten started without enough capital background, without enough business savvy, who have struggled mightily and have lost lots. I tell the story all the time about a couple of retirees from the Ford Motor Plant who invested their entire retirement income in these wineries. At one time, they lived in beautiful houses, and by the time the winery finally was closed, they were living in a trailer park and lost everything. So you need to think about making sure that you have a good business plan. And finally, the other disaster that can happen is that you learn to like your product too much. This is a beverage of history and culture. We talk about that all the time. It's fun, it's interesting. You'll meet dynamic people, you'll be a star in your community. But wine contains alcohol and it can be abused. And there are some sad stories out there about people who have gotten too much wine too quickly and didn't manage and literally became alcoholics who've lost everything. So on the other side of the coin, it's a quality of life decision. You will live in a pretty area with pretty view sheds. You're going to be a community asset. Your Chamber of Commerce is going to want to hold their meetings there. They're going to be bragging about you. Your Convention and Visitors Bureau is going to love you because you're bringing lots of folks in. The restaurants in town, the gas stations in town, all will know that the dozens and sometimes hundreds of winery lovers who come to your operation will be spending money with them too. So you will be a real community asset. And as I said in the prior slide, a star in your hometown. Also provides you an opportunity to travel and to learn a little. One winery that I regularly quote says, I love this business because what I do, but it also allows me to travel the world. It allows me to eat and drink all I choose and to write the whole thing off. So there is an opportunity to travel and learn as long as you do it legally and within the confines of growing your business. You'll also find that as the winery goes, you will discover new friendships. Again, I can quote dozens of wineries who have maintained a circle of friends for a generation or two, but have expanded that group of friends to include the people that they've met at the winery, with whom they now travel, with whom they now have dinner on their off evenings. You will have some genuine, real friendships that come out of this wine business. And as I shared before, there are some very, very successful wineries who started with very little and now are living a very, very comfortable lifestyle. And it also can be something that you can involve the family in, either the family that is your siblings and your children, or a family that grows with the partnerships that you develop with your business partners. But it is a generational business. I can remember when my dad was in his late 60s and they were planting grapes on the farm, and someone asked him, "Why are you planting grapes at this age? You're not going to see well." His retort was, "My son and my grandson are going to stay involved in the business. So there's an opportunity to pass on your legacy as long as those folks are part of what you plan and are included in the plans as they grow." Before you begin, if you're at the very beginning stages, and even if you're partly into the journey that will become your winery, I'm going to recommend some things that you do in the next few months or years. First of all, you need to start visiting wineries who can produce wines that are similar to what you hope to produce and what you can produce. It makes no sense for you to go to California, fall in love with a Zinfandel, and try and bring the grape Zinfandel into a Midwest market and grow it successfully. It doesn't work. It also doesn't do you much good to go to a glamorous winery again in Napa or Sonoma or up in Washington State, that is huge and has huge capital investment, but also has very, very deep pockets. You need to visit some wineries that are doing the kinds of things you will be able to do, and visit lots of them. Secondly, you need to make your own wine and make it lots. Um, After it's ready, blind taste it with your friends, but make sure the friends are not the only ones who taste it. Bring it to your church group. Bring some strangers in off the street who you have some relationship, and have them do some tasting of your wines blind, so they don't know what they are tasting. I would also absolutely encourage you to, when you are doing that blind tasting, add in some commercially produced wines. If you're going to make a Vidal Blanc and you want to make a great Vidal Blanc that you can sell for $12 or $13 a bottle, and that the consumer will pay that amount for, you need to find some wines in that price range. Put it in with your blind tasting as ringers. Again, tasting them all blind. Have these folks take some notes and respond to what they are tasting, and then take their advice. Don't take it personally. This is not about personal um, uh, feelings. It's about producing a product that consumers out there will buy. Then once you get these wines fairly well perfected, I would suggest you enter some amateur wine competitions. There are lots and lots of them out there. They are generally judged pretty fairly by some people who are fairly knowledgeable. And they'll give you some good feedback on the kinds of progress you're making in the quality of wines you're trying to produce. Then I would certainly look for some professional assistance. Um, Kent State in Ashtabula has very strong viticulture and enology degree programs. And for those of you who don't need a degree, they also have certificates in things like sanitation and the varieties of grape growing and blending and post-fermentation work. So you need to think about that. There are also some degrees online from UC Davis. Cornell also has some classes. So make sure you're taking gathering some materials that will help you make better wines. Even though your wines are good, they'll always get better. And then after you visit that first round of wineries tasting their wines, and after you've entered your competitions and you're doing pretty well, I would make another round of visits to the wineries. Some close, not some so close, some a little farther away. And I would pick ones that obviously are incredibly successful, a little larger than you probably, and some that are struggling, so that you see the pluses and minuses of what each of them are doing. Look at their layout and design. Look at the themes that they have. Look at the traffic patterns. Do people come in and do things flow easily? Are the tractors leaving dirt across the parking lot where the Mercedes is going to be parked in the next couple of hours? Is their equipment new? Is it clean? Is it if it's used, if it in fact is in good condition? And then I would look at their websites, look at their marketing efforts, look at their social media, look at their brochures. What are they doing either very well or not so well? And then observe their wine lists and their price points. What are they doing, plus and minuses, both the successful wineries and those that are just barely keeping their doors open or perhaps on the verge of closing? And finally, sometime in a couple of years before you're open, or even during the first few years that you are open, visit some trade shows. You will learn as much from the vendors at the trade shows as you will in any of those classes that you take anywhere. The big one in the East is the Eastern Winery Exposition, and it rotates typically between Syracuse and the suburbs of Philadelphia every March. The Unified in California is an amazing, a huge trade show. I think the biggest in North America. It attracts 10 or 12,000 people. And if you have the opportunity, maybe combine that with a trip to visit some wineries, perhaps in Lodi, perhaps in the Russian River Valley. Again, if you haven't been to Napa, go to Napa the first time, but then find some wineries in other less known areas that would be of size and scope that will replicate what you're trying to do. We do have a conference called License to Steal. It's a marketing conference, and it usually is co-located within the Eastern Winery Exposition. And that takes place again in March. And finally, each of the states have their own wine competitions, their own wine conferences, and they generally are melded together with a trade show. And in Ohio, we meet in Columbus every February, but all the other states pretty much have their own conferences sometime between November and usually March. Before you begin, also, you need to figure out whether or not you want to grow your grapes, purchase grapes, or buy juice. Or can you do all of that? Maybe yes, but if you're planting grapes, you need a long-term plan. First of all, figure out what you can grow. It takes a year or so to get the land ready. The universities, including Ohio State and Virginia Tech, have some GIS programs. They can literally fly over electronically your property and make some recommendations on the varieties that you might want to consider planting that will grow, that you can grow successfully in your area. If you are in an area where there is a shorter spring and colder winters, you're not going to be able to grow those tender vinifera. Whereas there's some cold hardy varieties like Marquette and St. Croix, other things, Pepin, St. Pepin, Frontenac, that do very, very well at 10 or 20 or even 30 below zero. So you'll need to understand what kind of grapes you can grow. Once you determine what you can grow, you need to find a nursery that can provide you with appropriate stock. Some of your stock will necessarily need to be grafted. And when the nurseries are grafting, it is a 2 or 3 year process. So you're going to need to plan early. If you're looking at this in the spring and you're planning on planting this next spring, you're probably too late. So you need 18 months to 2 years to determine if you need grafted vines, what quantity you're going to need. If you're going to need 50 plants, that's one thing. But if you're going to plant 2 or 3 or 4 acres, you need to have enough lead time and make sure you are going to a reputable nursery. I would also make sure that you try and find a nursery that's, if you're in the East, in your climactic region. They graft stock that is appropriate for the climate in which we grow. If you're in California, if you're in Colorado, look for nurseries in your hometown. In the East, a lot of folks use AA, they use grafted grape. There's a number of good ones in the East. If you decide that growing grapes is going to be too much and you want to purchase juice, you can purchase basically all the juice you want, but you need to make sure that it's of good quality. Just like in advertising, if you have a fuzzy picture, the display ad that you're going to be putting in the magazine is going to be terrible, garbage in, garbage out. You need to make sure you invest in good quality fruit from a reputable vendor. While it will not be an inexpensive commitment, it is one of the least expensive things you're going to do in building this winery, and it is really the foundation of everything else. So make sure you're getting good fruit. Ask around. There will be lots of wineries who will be willing to help you in terms of the experiences that they've had with vendors that are good and not so good. If you happen to be in Ohio, remember that you can bring in as much juice as you want, but in Ohio, if you're bringing in finished wine, which you can bring up to 40% of the wine that you bring into your cellar as a finished wine product. But that does not mean you can just bottle it. You need to make sure you do something. In a state like Ohio, you have a manufacturing permit. That means you need to blend, you need to sweeten, you need to do something with it to create a wine that you can put in a bottle. And in Ohio and a number of other states, You are not allowed to purchase shiners. Shiners are finished wines provided by a vendor where the wine is in a bottle and the cork is there and there's just no label on it. Some states do allow shiners. I think Missouri is one of them that does, but certainly in some states you cannot. I have a horror story of a small winery in Ohio who worked with a vendor from out of state, got everything set. He sold her a bunch of shiners. The shiners came in, the state came in and said you can't use them. She had to decork everything. It was a nightmare for her. She had a huge capital investment in making good on the law. So understand the law. If you're going to consider financing, if you're independently wealthy and you can finance this thing yourself, and I will make sure, I will say with you, to make sure that you have enough staying power because there are going to be unexpected expenses. Starting on a shoestring in this era is not nearly as easy as it was 25 or 30 years ago. So you're probably going to need to borrow some money. If you're going to do that, you're going to need a strong business plan. You're going to need a strong marketing plan. One of the videos subsequent to this one will be on writing a business plan. Another will be on writing a marketing plan. When you do, I'd strongly suggest if you're in a rural area, you go to your FSA, your Farm Service Agency is a part of USDA, and they are wonderful. Through the polar vortex, they worked with us to save the industry by allowing us to replant. They pretty much understand the business. They have all kinds of opportunities for minority and for female-owned businesses. So go to your FSA and check with them about the resources they might have. There are commercial banks that will also have some good experience with wines. Sometimes you can get a loan from family and friends, make sure they understand what they're getting into, and make sure that you always have more than 51% ownership so that you can control things as they move forward. You're going to need some more dollars than you expect, probably. Your local SBA will probably have some gap financing available, not inexpensive, but it really, really is an opportunity to consider if you need some gap financing. If you're going to establish some partnerships, you need to make sure that there is a clear definition of responsibilities. 2 or 3 families get together, open a winery, and the one family runs into financial trouble, gets a divorce, has a situation where they no longer want to spend every Saturday working at the winery. The other partners are stuck being there. It is a very, very difficult situation. Friendships can be destroyed very, very easily. So the final thing, and probably the most important thing I'm going to share with you if you're getting into the business, is to, at the very beginning, establish an exit strategy. If it's going to be to pass it on to a generation that's coming, if it's going to be to sell it to a partner, if it's going to be to close the business, if it's going to be to find an investor to take it over. Make sure you know what you're going to try and do with it when the time comes. Some background. I'm a big proponent on figuring out what others have done and following their suggestions. So things you need to have in your library for sure. Kevin Zraly has a book called Windows on the World. It's a Windows on the World wine course, I think it's called. It doesn't talk much about regional wines, but it's all about wines itself, and it will give you some really, really good readable background. There's a guy named Jim Linden from Virginia who has a very respected winery. And Jim has a little book out there called Backyard Vintner. It's very, it touches on what growing grapes and making wine is all about. It's a good resource for you to begin to look at, start thinking about it. Later on, I've got some technical recommendations for you, but this is a really good thing that you'll look at first. And then secondly, you leave in your staff room so that your staff who might be interested in learning more becomes a little more knowledgeable. I'm a big fan of this book that Jim has produced. There's an organization called Wine Folly. About once a week, I get an e-letter from them, some really cool stuff. And Wine Folly has a very fun book on wine generally that is good for you to read and for you to, again, provide to your staff so that they can learn a little. I would strongly suggest that you get a subscription to Wine Business Monthly. It is the publication for the industry. Comes out once a month and is full of amazing information that will be, I'm sure that most of the winemakers in the country read that every single month. It is an important piece for you. A woman named Maria Smith has an OSU Extension newsletter called OGen. This is Maria's email, and I would sign up for that. It gives you all kinds of good information. She works with Ahmed Dami, who is the extension viticulturist. Very, 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 very good information. I have a newsletter called Tuesday Tidbits. It's all about marketing. It comes out just about every Tuesday, and it will come automatically to your mailbox. It is free. You have to sign up for it. Todd Steiner, the amazing extension enologist from Ohio, has a book, a wine business book, coming out sometime in 2022. When it comes, it will be incredibly valuable. It's being funded by the Grape Industries Program, and Todd has a whole bunch of contributing authors who are giving all kinds of great information for the book. And finally, if you're growing grapes, Ohio State has a Bulletin 919. It's called Growing Grapes in the Midwest, that gives you all kinds of good information. That would be the beginning of what I would suggest you establish as a library. And Todd Steiner, our extension enologist, I asked him for a recommendation of a couple of books, and they gave me a bunch. So you'll be able to go back over this video and acquire some of these things that allow you to do a better job of producing that fine wine you intend soon to produce. We're also going to have a couple of videos on licensing. But if you're going to establish the business, the first thing you need to do is acquire a permit from TTB. It's Tax and Treasury Bureau. And there is a basic winery permit. The website is there. Lots of people wade through it and do it on their own. But some people need some help. And I always recommend a guy named Jerry Chaika. Jerry was the TTB guy here in the Midwest for years and years and years. Hugely respected. He's living out in Colorado now, but he does some work for a lot of the wineries who are getting started. I pass his name on frequently. At the same time, while that is being processed, and the feds are getting a little faster, it's usually a month or two before that comes back to you. At the same time, you need to work on getting your local or your state permit ready. This is the link for the Ohio Division of Liquor Control. And I will share with you, it takes a little longer because some of them in the spring, at least of 2022, are still working remotely, and they are very, very backed up with all the new applications. They deal with beer, wine, spirits, and amazing. And so they are very, very busy. You also need to understand, and we're going to do a whole video on the various permits that are out there. But many of you will get what's called an A2 in the state of Ohio. It's a manufacturing permit to make wine. It allows you to make wine and cider. In Ohio, cider is considered wine. Or if you're growing your own grapes, you can get an A2F. The A2F is more of a marketing than a technical permit thing, but it allows you to tell the world that you're really a farmer. Then you're going to need an S permit. Actually, it's an S1 permit to allow you to ship. You don't think you're going to need it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And you're going to need to get to a B2A that's going to allow you to sell to a retailer. And then down the road, if you're interested in being able to sell other people's wines or beer or even spirits, you're going to need an A1A. The A2 permit is $76. The A2F is $76. The S permit is $25 a year. So even if you only sell half a dozen bottles of wine to that tourist who's walking through who lives in Indianapolis, it behooves you to get that S permit so you'd be allowed to ship. The B2A is another $25. So for your A2, one of them, plus your S permit, plus your B2A, which allows you to sell to retailers, it's only $126. So I would get them all at once. It's much easier to get them all at the beginning than to get them later. And again, you don't think you're going to sell to the grocery store around the corner. But if you're only open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, on Sunday afternoon and on Monday evening, when somebody wants a bottle of your wine and Mr. Jones carryout around the corner carries it, you want to be able to provide that to Mrs. Jones as a service. And then down the road, you're going to need, if you want to expand to other beverages, you're going to need an A1A. That's a $3,900 a year investment. So you need to think hard and fast about how much beer and other spirits you'll be able to sell. There are a lot of other requirements for the A1A. You have an extra bathroom and you have to have hot food all the time. So the A1A will be something you'll address down the road. And again, we'll do a whole video on permits. If you need help, we have a lawyer in Columbus that we use all the time. His name is Mark Myers, hugely respected, and he can help you wade through. Again, both the federal and state permits, lots of people do it on their own, but if you need help, I just provide these as references. Once you get your permit, you're going to have to be working on your labels, and we'll have a whole video on labels here. I'm going to invite some guest speakers to talk about the kinds of things you need to consider. And you also need to, once your wine is commercial, you need to register it with the state of Ohio. Each wine has to be registered. I think it's like 25 or maybe $50 to register a label. So if you have 6 wines, you're going to have to invest about $300 in getting those registered, but they must be registered. I remember going to an event in Akron a couple of years ago where a cider manufacturer had 25 different wines and none of them were registered. Not only did he have the huge fines, he had to go back and register them anyway. And finally, if you're going to sell wine beyond the doors of your tasting room, except when you're doing a festival, festivals are accepted. But if you're going to sell it to the local grocery store, or you're going to try and go to a restaurant, or you have a staffer who you'll use a solicitor, those people have to be licensed. It is $50 for a 2-year solicitor's license, and it can be renewed. Consulting and expertise beyond the Mark Myers and Jerry Chica recommendation. Todd Steiner is our enology guy. Here is his email. Imad Jamie is the head of the viticulture program. His email. Maria Smith is the viticulturist. So they also produce something called the Ohio Grape Web. I would sign up for that for sure. I'm certainly going to encourage you to become a part of the Ohio wine community. OWPA for our future members, $100 for a year. That gives you access to, we've got some free legal consult. We've got some scholarship programs. We do a lot of events. We certainly would hope that you would join the association. We'll talk later on about all the association benefits in one of our other videos. Ohio Grape Industries Program, headed by Christy Eckstein, has a winery toolkit. Once you get your license, there'll be lots of names and addresses and contacts in that for you. And I will share with you, liquor control in Ohio is great to work with. There is a second agency in Ohio called the Safety Commission. And in fact, the Ohio Department of Public Safety is a part of the Ohio Highway Patrol. Those are the guys that are gotcha guys. They are the ones that go into a winery or into a bar and send in some guy who looks like he's 47 and he's really only 17, and then arrest people for making service to minor. That is not the Division of Liquor Control. That is public safety. Division of Liquor Control is out there to work with us, to help us to comply. They are very, very good to work with, and you'll enjoy getting to know and work with them. And then you need to think about location. Just like in real estate, location, location, location. On those, look back at the notes for the wineries that you visited in those early visits. And one of the reasons that some of them may be successful is that they have other wineries around them. You need to think about clustering wineries. One winery is a winery. 3 wineries is a destination that has beds and breakfasts and restaurants all around them. So most successful wineries, be they in Ohio or Iowa or in Georgia or in Virginia, are within 45 minutes or so of a population center. People will drive that far for a wine experience. When you're looking for property, you need to, if you're going to be in the country, you are going to need to think about EPA. If you're going to be on sewers, it's not so much of a problem, but EPA is going to be checking your water and checking your sewage system. It is your biggest hurdle beyond getting your license. Your biggest hurdle is going to be, in the country at least, with sewers and water. There are also some local zoning issues. There is a piece of legislation that was passed years ago that allows wineries to build buildings without a formal permit if they grow the grapes on the property where the building is located and they sell the wine on that same property. There are some legal nuances regarding that, and we'll do a whole video on local zoning, but you need to check into local zoning. You need to also visit your nearby wineries. Let them know you're coming. I remember there was a winery opened up west of Cleveland, and it was like a big secret. Nobody was talking about it. They'd come from another industry where competition was cutthroat. That is not what you'll find here. You'll be welcomed by the wineries in your region because you will bring more folks to the area and you'll become more and more of a destination. As I visit wineries around the state, especially even the ones clustered in Northeast Ohio, when I visit them, about 25% of the customers of those wineries are loyalists. They just visit that winery all the time. But 75% of the people float from winery to winery to winery, and everybody encourages that. You need to let the neighbors know that you're coming and that you're going to be a part of that family. Also, I mentioned GIS before. If you're going to be planting vines, You need to find a place where you can grow the kinds of grapes that you want to grow. I put this in for folks to think about as you're planning to grow. Every once in a while, I'll run across a winery who just wants to produce wine and just sell it to wholesalers and put it on a retail shelf. You cannot afford that, okay? If you're selling a $20 bottle of wine, you only get $10 from the retailer, excuse me, from the wholesaler. And frankly, it'll probably not move off the shelf because nobody knows about you. You truly do need a tasting room. There are two ways to sell wine generally. One is to push it through the market, your Gallo or your Mondavi, and you take out a $10,000 or $50,000 ad in Enthusiast or Spectator. And people begin to see it. And then you take that ad out again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And maybe people will begin to buy your Kendall Jackson, whatever, or your Mondavi, whatever, or your Barefoot, whatever. But in our business, we do something called pulling it through the market, one customer at a time. We do not have those huge advertising budgets to make people demand our wine as they walk into a retail establishment. So if you are an operation that opens, and many of the operations in Ohio start with a 1 to 2,500 gallon, but you're going to need to grow to 5 fairly quickly if you're going to support a family. Up to about 5,000 gallons, if you're in a decent location, you should be able to sell all of your wine on site. It's mom and dad and a kid and 1 or 2 part-time employees. You might have a handful of those neighborhood retail outlets, but you're basically going to be a farmer's market. People are going to come out, they're going to enjoy what you have, they're going to sip a little wine, and they're going to take some home. Then between 5 and 10,000 gallons, the transitions begin. And when you get to about 10,000 gallons, you're going to have to do more. Even someone in a high tourist destination area has a hard time selling more than 10,000 gallons at one site. So you're going to have to start thinking about events. Valley Vineyard started with these steak dinners, which have been amazingly successful and replicated across the country. People do balloon races, and they do festivals, and they do antique car shows, and they do paint and sip. They do all kinds of things. So you need to start getting people that have interests beyond just wine to come visit you. We'll talk a little bit about affinity groups in one of the other videos when we talk about marketing. You're also going to have to think about self-delivery. That 1 or 2 part-time employee might just be the ticket. Mom or one of the adult kids gets on the phone on Tuesday and starts calling 3 or 4 outlets, maybe within a 50-mile radius, maybe 20 or 30 eventually. And on Tuesday, that person will take the orders, and on Thursday or Friday, that part-time delivery person is going to hop in the van and deliver it. In Ohio, you're not allowed to sell from the back of a vehicle, so the orders have to be pre-made and pre-prepared. Or you're going to have to hop in bed proverbially with your tourism bureau. You're going to sit on their board. You're going to invite motor coaches to come visit you. You're going to go to the local Holiday Inn and do some tastings on Thursday night or Friday night for their open reception for the guests that come in for that weekend. You're going to have to find some ways to work with your tourism people. Then when you hit 25,000 gallons or so, unless you're really exceptional, I only know one exception in the country that's gone much beyond that with self-delivery. So at 30,000 gallons, you're going to have to look for a distributor. And you're going to have to be careful. In places like Ohio, we're called a franchise state. And the franchise state creates a relationship between you and the distributor. You tell the distributor, Mr. Distributor, you have these counties, and you will serve these. You will sell wine. You'll sell wine exclusively in those number of counties. Do not ever give a distributor the whole state, because in a franchise situation in many states, and Ohio specifically, as one of my wineries used to say, it's cheaper and way easier to get rid of a wife of 25 years than it is to get rid of your distributor in a franchise situation. You really can't get rid of them, even if they're doing a terrible job. And once you give them that territory, they basically own that territory. So you need to think about that. Or we have several wineries around the country, actually, who have decided they're going to, every weekend that they can, go to some festival or event off-site. So you're going to have to make a major commitment to get staff together to be able to do farmers markets and do festivals and sell enough wine to go beyond much over that 30,000 gallon. Then when you hit 50,000 gallons, you're going to have to do a combination of more distribution. And at 50,000 gallons, the distributors are good to work with. Please don't get me wrong. We need them. They are critical to our business. But they are really not selling your wine. They are delivering your wine. They're storing your wine. They're managing the money for your wine. At 50,000 gallons, you are going to have to make the jump to hire a salesman. And that involves a $50,000 or $60,000 salary. It involves a vehicle. It involves an expense account. So you need to think what you're going to do when you get to that point. And then finally, you're going to have a whole marketing team if you get much more than 75,000 gallons. So I've got a dozen or so videos coming to help you on the path to success. I hope this was valuable. We're distributing this broadly to anybody who's interested. So if you know of someone who'd like to get a copy of this, let us know. We're going to load it on an app called Teachable very shortly, and it'll be available for download. Thank you very much. I hope this will be helpful. Thanks.